Through my research for this video, I've discovered deeper information I couldn't find being covered anywhere amongst the internet. I've discovered patterns and intentional design choices that have either been scarcely mentioned online before or not mentioned at all, and all of my sources will be in the description below. Now, we all love video games. They're emotional stories and characters that are rich with personality. They often resonate within us, and we feel emotionally connected to them for our own reasons. But of course, a lot of the time, it's difficult to emotionally appeal to a blank canvas of fans worldwide, when everyone has come through different cultures and upbringings. 95% of the time, video games try to avoid this and stick to their own off-world story, which naturally attracts its own fans over time. It's sort of an industry standard to stick to the one specific niche. But sometimes, just sometimes, when developers try to create a game for a specific audience, it has a high chance of leaving the rest of the world pushed aside. This happens quite often within JRPGs, one of the very few places in the world where many video games are not developed by the default universal language, English. Over the last 30 years, Japan has created some of the most riveting and emotional stories in the industry, but have been locked behind a language barrier for a long time. Sometimes these can get translated, but then face the issue of being so culturally relevant and targeted for a Japanese audience, it fails to appeal for the rest of the world, which is where the term localization becomes key. You can imagine localization to be the big brother of translation. Translation allows you to read and understand what's going on, but localization can help you feel what's going on and feel closer to the media. It's a type of translation that adapts the core elements and story of a game to become more culturally relevant to people worldwide. You'll find it feels more native and removes any language or culturally exclusive barriers. But in short, a great localization adapts dialogue, humour, and personalities that resonate closer to fans around the world who wouldn't feel so close in the original version, which is why I want to talk about Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest is a series which dedicates its translations and localization with pure passion. The teams responsible go above and beyond, ensuring fans outside of Japan can resonate themselves into the games and feel culturally relevant to the series. The way Dragon Quest targets these different cultures is not to the country the game is being localized for, but instead the country or culture in the world of the game. Across many Dragon Quest titles, it features characters that represent real-world cultures, where the localized version expands upon these concepts up to 11 by including their dialects, language, and exclusive cultural mannerisms. Not only in main characters, but entire locations and NPCs follow the same structure, making the entire world feel alive and real. The teams go above and beyond to really push the boundaries that these aspects are based on real-world cultures actually feel like and represent real-life cultures. It's like adding a little bit of spice to a blank piece of chicken. It's the exact same food, but better. In these games, they often use cultural puns and whimsical interpretations to help suit the medieval fantasy vibe of the games, and I can say with absolute certainty, that is the reason I love these games so dearly. I see some hate online toward them, calling it childish, silly, and offensive to the source. On one hand, I respect your opinion, but on the other hand, where the fuck is your sense of whimsy and childhood joy? Do you really want every character to sound like a generic anime dub? You want everyone to sound like a white American teenage boy? But anyway, I've yapped on about localization a bit much now, so it's time to get into the point of this video, which is diving into the mind-blowing success, which is the localization in Dragon Quest Swords for the Nintendo Wii. Almost all named characters in Dragon Quest Swords are localized puns of real swords or have historic meaning to medieval cultures, folklore, mythology, and legend. The localization in these Dragon Quest games are just astonishing, and the staff responsible are the same team who worked on Dragon Quest VIII for the same roles, which is also my second favourite game of all time. It's amazing. The accent adaptation is a repeating trope in this game. 13 out of 16 of these characters have significant relevance to the historic names chosen befitting their personalities. If that doesn't make sense, let me put it this way. In the original Japanese version, they make a character canonically British, but it's sort of just left there. But in the localized form, the character is adapted further into this idea, meaning he speaks British, he acts British, he has specific British dialect and mannerisms. Most surprisingly, he has a name themed after a British sword, of which that sword's name was chosen since it has historic relevance befitting to the character's personality. So much detail to the point it feels like a real-life British person. But that wasn't a hypothetical, that was a real example, so now let's get into the examples. Little warning here, I'm about to get autistically deep here to prove and display the intelligence and passion of the staff responsible for these amazing localizations. Now, with the most known example, midway into the story, the hero gets given the nickname Blade, for obvious reasons, meaning the blade of a sword. There's not much known about the hero, other than the events of the story begin on the eve of his 16th birthday and follow the events after his journey to undertake a trial to become a man. But now the rest of them get a little bit tricky to explain, which only makes its localization all the more astonishing, and I'm going to get into some detail here. Fleuret. In the late 1600s, the French used rapier-like swords for fencing, but those with blunt and dull edges resembled a flowered tip, which led to this type of practice weapon being dubbed fleuret, meaning to flourish like a flower in French. What makes this even greater is that in the early 20th century, the modern English translation changed this into being referred to as foil, not fleuret, making the old term slowly be lost to time. Which takes us back to the game, where Fleuret is a young French woman with a thick accent and is also my favourite character in the game. She's awesome and the origin of her name is awesome. Her heavy accent is followed by French mannerisms and expressions. She often has a disgusted, sharp look that makes soldiers around town scared of her, befitting to her name's origin. Anlace. An aimless was a medieval dagger often worn as a gentleman's accessory during the 14th century in England, displayed in multiple royal art pieces from this era and also mentioned in a lot of literature too. In DQ Swords, Anlace is a highly spoken royal prince and a true gentleman in mannerisms, mind and passion. He speaks with great politeness at all times and is not snobbish at all. His vocabulary had me googling definitions for words I were convinced weren't real. An aimless blade, where his name originates, is a type of accoutrement, basically meaning accessory to the era's attire, so it's fitting that he also speaks as if he is from royal 16th century England, invoking all mannerisms of the time also. Claymore. The most famous sword of all that is referenced in the game is a claymore sword, a Scottish two-handed cutting sword used in the 16th and 17th century. It was a blade used in harsh battle and was a brutally efficient weapon of a soldier. Claymore the character is a warrior, a knight of Avalonia, but he also has a Scottish accent. If you've ever met a Scottish person, chances are they are very laid back and love drinking, which is exactly what Claymore is. He's either off adventuring or fighting, or he's in the pub downing drinks, making jokes and hitting on women. Claymore is regarded as a hero by everyone for his strength and strategy in the past, directly relevant to the Claymore sword's origin. This trend goes far beyond the main cast. In fact, every single named character in the game's story, minus a couple exceptions, is named, themed, and resembles after a sword or some other mystery throughout history. Queen Katana. The katana sword is used primarily by the British monarchy from way back in 1236 in London for ceremonial acts, used by kings and queens exclusively to announce knights of the kingdom. It's accompanied kings and queens for over 800 years since its creation, a historic piece of history symbolising mercy and clemency, and is often dubbed the Sword of Mercy. Now, Queen Katana in Dragon Quest Swords is a noble and loyal queen of Avalonia who takes her duties to heart. She's a merciful and intelligent queen who is willing to sacrifice herself for the good of the kingdom, a fitting character for an allegory of such a historic piece of British monarch history. Misericord. The Misericord dagger is a historic knife that traces back to the early medieval combat days, a blade thin enough to sneak through the cracks in armour, and dubbed the Blade of Mercy as a secondary weapon used for compassion, which was a testament to a knight's training and strength. It embodied a chivalric code, which acted as a gesture of respect for a knight's virtue. The Misericord blade allowed knights to follow this code, and manifested from this origin leads us to Minister Misericord, who is an esteemed personal retainer of Queen Katana and deals with the day-to-day activities of the Kingdom of Avalonia. He often uses an ostentatious vocabulary that confuses himself at times. The royal significance of the sword does not invoke its battle significance of the minister, but its royal cultural legacy crosses over to him. It's very fitting that the character based on the Blade of Mercy is a personal retainer to a queen based on the Sword of Mercy.
You were stonking.
Colonel Cutlass. Much like the minister, Colonel Cutlass is responsible for the Queen's protection and day-to-day security of the kingdom. His name originates from the cutlass blades from the British Caribbean in the 17th century, used primarily by sailors, but in modern history, the cutlass blade was used as a mandatory weapon of protection for the British police force in the 19th century. He likely got his name taken from this piece of British history. Although the police force does not have colonel as a rank, his duties in Avalonia follow the same duties as those who used the blades in late 19th and early 20th century England, and what makes this character extra special is how his entire personality was made up in the localized version only. In the original Japanese, he is nameless. Also, these last three double up as an extra pun using alliteration in their names: Colonel Cutlass, Minister Misericord, and Queen Katana. Sure, katana isn't alliteration when reading, but the same sounds are made when speaking, and all three of these names are directly relevant to British monarchy history. Dirk. A dirk blade is traditionally a Scottish dagger used for hand-to-hand combat by British naval officers. It was also part of the attire as a personal sidearm of Scottish Highlanders in the 16th century. However, later on it was only permitted for legal use by Highlanders if they were in service of the British Empire, which is where the tie to Dragon Quest comes in. Sir Dirk Worthington is a knight for the Kingdom of Avalonia. However, his duties are to test the strength of potential knights in a trial after they venture deep into the mountainous region and into the Caliburn Cave. More directly meaning, the dirk blade was only permitted by Scottish Highlanders if they worked for the British Army. Sir Dirk Worthington is Scottish, he speaks Scottish, and is a knight for Avalonia, which directly resembles and acts as a British kingdom. And he also resides in a cave amongst a mountainous region. Another name for a mountainous region is called the Highlands. So far, these were not random lucky dip names that were chosen like some online have claimed. Each of the 5 royal members of the kingdom I've mentioned, being Anlis, Claymore, Katana, Misericord and Dirk, have followed the pattern of being named after historic British swords, whilst they all resonate the blade's historic British influence and legacy through their character personalities. It's like the historic blade comes to life through them. I found very little sources online discussing the cultural relevance of the names chosen. It is known that some of them are named after swords, and I only found one source here that even mentions that the characters have ties to the names chosen to, but no real actual explanation. Even on the Dragon Quest wikis, it's scarcely glossed over, only mentioning that they're named after the blade, not that the blade is tied to who they are. Only through my own research have I discovered the patterns and intention behind these carefully chosen choices, bringing to light how amazing and passionate this localization team is. Even the fact that all characters are named after swords is cool. The fact that British characters are named after British swords is cool. But the fact each of the swords chosen have historic meaning and relevance to the character blows my fucking mind. Moving on to more, and now here is where they really begin to get interesting. Swordmaster Dao. There are 4 traditional Chinese weapons throughout history, one of which is a sword dubbed the Dao. There is an extremely long history with multiple variations of the Dao, beginning in the Shang Dynasty from the Bronze Age, and for those of you who don't know, this is estimated to be between 5,300 and 3,200 years ago, back when writing was first utilised by early age society, leaving this to be an iconic traditional blade in Chinese history. Now in modern history, it's used extensively in martial arts schools, and beginning in 1991, the Wushu Championships, a martial arts competition. The Daoshu was a popular event in these championships, which is a display of 8 techniques and 5 stances that users will be scored upon. It is still an active martial arts competition as of 2024. Now in the game, Dao is an elderly swordsman who was introduced in a martial arts tournament at the beginning of the game and is undefeated. He wears traditional Chinese clothing and dedicates his life to martial arts. He is the master of Claymore and teaches the hero ancient techniques in the story, also at times inputting his wisdom helping the story flow. The Dao sword's long history is perfectly represented through him in the game, and I couldn't be happier with this outcome. Grossmesser. Let's play this cutscene and see what we think at face value.
I am Grossmesser. I know what you're thinking. Why do I have a big fork, not a big knife? Well, I just do, yeah?
So, when he's introduced, Grossmesser says he knows what we're thinking. Why does he have a fork and not a knife? Well, at face value, we just assume because most powerful foes usually battle with knives or blades, minus a few exceptions. What he means here is that he is aware and assumes that we are aware that his name is a direct translation from German to English of the words large knife, Grossmesser. To take this even further, the Messer is a series of German blades from 15th and 16th century. There's no general classification of these blades and it's rather subjective, but the direct translation of Grossmesser's name refers to the single-handed swords used for self-defense. Also within this cutscene, Grossmesser is immediately portrayed as vile and disgusting, while he mocks Anlis with his obnoxious burps and drunk-like demeanor. This is also relevant to the German drinking culture during the same era of the Messer blade's first creation. During that time in German history, drinking alcohol was a daily activity for all social classes, and some even believed it was a healthier alternative to water. Literally every meal of the day was paired with beer or sometimes wine, and had extremely high alcohol consumption rates per capita. This is reflected abundantly clear in Grossmesser's personality. At first we think it's just a random novelty that he's drunk, but it's quite the opposite. We just didn't know the context to why he was specifically chosen to be that way. Draug. Follow me here. There are different interpretations amongst Icelandic, Swedish, Norwegian and other Nordic folklore for a draug, also from other pieces of media that take inspiration from it. Here is the extremely long story short. Across many different Norse mythology interpretations and stories, the overall classification of a draug would be a ghost with a physical, tangible body with superhuman strengths. Draugs were often portrayed more directly to the folklore tales in other pieces of media such as Lord of the Rings, or Skyrim and God of War, and they followed that inspiration. But Dragon Quest decided to stop the trend and have draug depicted as a spirit inside of a living statue that resembles a godlike man. Now, the living statue is a monster that's appeared multiple times in Dragon Quest, but in Dragon Quest Swords, it is the only time this living statue was named as Draug in the entire series. This theory is entirely plausible that it is a spirit that's taken over a dead living statue, creating its own adaptation of the Nordic myth of a reanimated corpse. And if you don't believe me, it's entirely plausible that it's true, since in other interpretations of mythical beasts, Dragon Quest has changed its appearance in contrast to the designs ran by popular culture. The Localization team likely knew this and played on this idea of the Nordic myths. And if that's not even enough, in Icelandic interpretations, draugs often live in royal palaces, often guarding treasure, which is exactly what draug is in Dragon Quest Swords, a monster who lives in another dimension, inside of a royal palace, defending a mystical artifact, inside of a monster's body that we've seen plenty times before. But the more clear put at hand is that draug spelled backwards is God, since he is guardian of the mirror world. It just plays perfectly. Golok. A Golok blade is associated with natives within Southeast Asia, or more specifically Indonesia, usually the Sundanese or Betawi people. There are two types, one used domestically in the kitchen and one for protection, traditionally carried by only Betawi men. It is a symbol of masculinity, bravery, and typically held by the local strongman or village champion. Now, Golok in the game follows the ages-old trope of more strength equals less intelligence, so much where Golok attempts to use fairly simple phrases in order to sound smart, but instead confuses himself with his own words and ultimately just attacks the group instead. All he really knows is strength, so much to the point the main evil villain Xiphos entrusts his strength to guard the gate to his castle. Xiphos is a smart demon. He wouldn't choose someone who was not capable. Golok is an extremely strong human-like troll, wearing nothing but caveman rags. It's entirely plausible that the Golok blade was chosen for his name due to his sheer strength and the blade's relevance to tribal strongmen. The next few follow the same uncanny synchronicity to the preceding names that have significance so far, except the next few feel a little weaker compared. But anyway, Briquette. The Briquette blade is a French sword from the 18th century, preceding the French Revolution. The Briquette boss fight also takes place in the same level just before Fleurette the French woman is introduced into the story. Briquette also translates to fire lighter, as Briquette the boss is found within Galentine Glades, which, spoiler alert, in chapter 7, a large fire is being spread across the forest where Briquette resides. I feel with this one the two coincidences are enough for like a plausible questioning, but I wouldn't say it's tangible enough evidence to say with certainty, yes, this is why it was chosen, but I will expand on this in a little bit. Briquette also plays a double pun, being named after the sword, and Briquette being similar to the word brick, as Briquette is a golem made of bricks. Xiphos. Xiphos' name comes from an ancient Greek weapon originating back from the weapon advancements during the Dark Ages. The Xiphos in Greek mythology is associated with heroes and gods, in stark contrast to him in the game, as he is in fact the game's main villain. Now, I wish I had a better story to tell for this game's final villain, but unfortunately the craziest thing I could find during my research is likely to be a coincidence. Xiphos' name comes from a Greek blade, and Xiphos throughout the story is seen through ancient stone tablets drawn generations ago. The relevance here is that the Greeks were notorious for writing within stone tablets. However, this aspect in the game is cemented as part of the story and not a conscious decision by the translators. It's possible they played upon this idea, but I cannot prove it definitively for myself. Now, the remaining characters, I'm really reaching for straws to find relevance to the names chosen. I'm not so confident in these, but they do have weak ties to the sword's namesake. Aruval. I'm reaching here, but the only relevance I could find regarding the Aruval blade and Aruval the character is how it was frequently used to chop coconuts by the British in the Caribbean. During the story, Aruval turns into a fishy, scaly monster being spotted around the coast and oceanside where coconuts grow. To be clear, I do not think this is tangible evidence to prove it was an intentional, conscious choice. I am definitely reaching with a 50-foot stick on this one, but we move on. Stiletto. Stiletto blade was a secondary weapon used by Italian soldiers for the same purposes as a misericord blade, to strike a merciful blow through a knight's armor. It has another definition, often referred to as a woman's shoe heel. Now this character is a very campy, flamboyant man, often flirty and ladylike to get you to try his training challenges. I am reaching again, this is not tangible evidence, most likely an extremely minor coincidence at its very best. I can only assume the last remaining boss of the story, the envoy of Xiphos, could not be found to be able to resemble a relevant sword, for it has no original name. The rest of the characters' names were chosen for a reason, at least I can say for certainty for most, but with the envoy, there's not a single blade reference or historical reference or meaning or cliche or pun or anything to its name, which also makes me slightly more confident in my theories about Arabal or Stiletto, because if their names was randomly chosen, why can't the envoy's names be random too? It makes me think there really is something else to those two names that we're missing. The envoy's only relevance would be that it's the first direct interaction with a beast that's tied to Xiphos within the story, tying it to the Xiphos blade, but it's such a far stretch. Minimogi is a character that resides under Avalonia, following a trend across many Dragon Quest games, being a shop where you trade mini medals that are found across the world in for weapons and items. Minimogi, mini medals. The mystical blade you acquire late in the story, the Red Nusadna, is a gift from the Guardian of the Mirror World. When read backwards through a mirror, Red Nusanda becomes Rend Asunder, and it is said in legend that one who commands a spirit centered enough to wield this blade shall rend land and sea asunder, to fell a great evil. An extremely obvious yet very subtle pun. The worldly locations too have been localized, continuing the British influence pun trend a large majority of the game follows. Arundite Heights is named after the most human knight in Welsh legends, Arundite, which is another name for Lancelot, who is a soldier of King Arthur. And another one following King Arthur in Welsh legends, the Excalibur blade is also referred to as Caliburn, which is where the name originates for the Caliburn Caves at the beginning of the game. It's also very likely that Galantine Glades retrieved its name from the French dish of galantine, also being the location where you meet Fleurette. Fleurette, Briquette, and Galantine Glades all have a French origin in common and all appear for the first time within the same level. The Red Sea is a clear reference to the story in the Bible where Moses split the Red Sea apart to allow Israelites to flee from Egyptian slavery. Much like in the Bible, the sea is split identically in the game and allows the group dry passage through to the end. To resemble the story of the Red Sea, in the game the sea is actually made of lava emitting a red glow. Also, you should click on one of these other videos on the screen if you enjoyed. Now, this video truly was the result of an extremely niche and deep random urge I had to discover more about Dragon Quest swords, and that the 7 of you who played this game can now appreciate it on a deeper level. Every piece of source material I used for this video will be attached in the description. Now, let me know your thoughts on Dragon Quest swords below, and I'll see you next time.